The conference room falls silent. 30 Allied officers freeze mid-breath. General George S. Patton stands leaning across the mahogany table toward Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, his face flushed with rage, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You want to know the difference between us, Monty? I win wars. You plan them." Montgomery's face drains of color. "I advance. You consolidate. I take risks. You make excuses." British officers exchange horrified glances. American officers stare at their boots, fighting smiles. "And you think your way is professional, while my way is reckless. Here's what's actually reckless, giving you command of anything more important than a parade." The silence that follows could swallow armies. At the head of the table, Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower sits with his head in his hands. His Chief of Staff, General Walter Bedell Smith, leans close and whispers, "Sir, should we intervene?" Eisenhower doesn't look up. His voice is barely audible. "Tell me he didn't just say that." "Which part, sir?" "All of it. Any of it. Tell me Patton didn't just call Montgomery incompetent to his face in front of 30 witnesses." Bedell Smith hesitates. "I can't tell you that, sir. Because he did." This is the story of the most explosive confrontation between Allied commanders during World War II, the moment when years of simmering rivalry erupted into open warfare, when one general's inability to control his tongue nearly destroyed the fragile coalition that was winning the war, and when Eisenhower learned that sometimes the most dangerous enemies aren't the ones you're fighting, but the ones sitting beside you at the strategy table. The Patton-Montgomery rivalry doesn't begin at that Versailles conference table. It begins 2 years earlier, under the scorching Sicilian sun, where two massive egos collide for the first time. Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily. The plan seems straightforward. Montgomery's 8th Army advances up the eastern coast toward Messina, while Patton's 7th Army provides support on the western flank. Support. That single word gnaws at Patton like a festering wound. "Support!" he snarls to his staff officers. "We're not a goddamn supporting act. We're an army." The British staff treats American forces with barely concealed condescension. British officers make comments about American inexperience within earshot of their allies. Montgomery's headquarters issues orders to American units as if they're subordinate auxiliaries rather than equal partners. Patton decides to turn the operation into a race. "We're getting to Messina before Montgomery," he tells his commanders. "I don't care how. Find a route, move fast, beat the British." His staff thinks he's joking. He's not. 3rd Army tears across Sicily at breakneck speed, ignoring doctrine, bypassing resistance, racing northward with reckless abandon. When Montgomery's forces arrive in Messina, they find Patton already there, standing in the city center, grinning like a wolf. "What kept you, Monty?" Montgomery's expression could freeze lava. He offers formal, frigid congratulations and leaves immediately, his staff trailing behind him like embarrassed children. From that moment, the rivalry becomes personal. It's no longer about strategy or tactics. It's about pride, ego, and which general history will remember as greater. Autumn 1944. Allied forces are advancing across France. The Germans are retreating. Victory seems tantalizingly close. Then, logistics becomes the enemy. Eisenhower faces an impossible decision. Limited fuel, limited supplies, 2 aggressive commanders demanding everything. Montgomery wants massive supply priority for Operation Market Garden, an ambitious plan to seize bridges across the Rhine and end the war by Christmas. Patton wants supplies for his own advance toward the German heartland. Both generals present their cases with absolute conviction. Both believe their approach will end the war weeks earlier. Both are certain the other's plan will fail. Eisenhower chooses Montgomery. Market Garden launches in September 1944 with massive resources, enormous preparation, and complete confidence. It fails catastrophically. Allied airborne forces are cut off, surrounded, and destroyed. Thousands die. The operation achieves nothing. Meanwhile, Patton's advance grinds to a halt for lack of fuel. "I could have won the war by Christmas," Patton tells anyone who will listen, his voice thick with bitterness. "But Ike gave everything to Montgomery's elaborate failure." When Montgomery hears this criticism, his response drips with aristocratic disdain. "If Patton hadn't outrun his supplies so recklessly, we wouldn't have had a supply crisis in the first place." The rivalry transforms from competitive to venomous. December 16th, 1944. German forces launch a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes, creating a dangerous bulge in Allied lines. American forces are caught off guard, surrounded, threatened with destruction. Patton performs what many consider his greatest feat of the war. He pivots Third Army 90 degrees in 48 hours and relieves the surrounded garrison at Bastogne. It's a maneuver of stunning brilliance, requiring coordination, speed, and battlefield genius that few commanders possess. Even Montgomery privately acknowledges it's remarkable. But then Montgomery makes a catastrophic public relations mistake. He's given overall command of Northern forces during the battle, a sensible military decision that infuriates American generals who see it as British interference. At a press conference after the battle, Montgomery describes the bulge as an interesting little battle, where British forces helped the Americans recover from their difficulties. The implication is clear. Incompetent Americans needed British rescuing. American commanders explode with rage. Patton's response is characteristically blunt. Montgomery couldn't find his ass with both hands and a map, but he's very good at holding press conferences and taking credit for other people's victories. By January 1945, the two men can barely occupy the same continent without generating tension that threatens Allied unity. Eisenhower's staff is nervous. Patton and Montgomery haven't been in the same room since the press conference incident. The upcoming strategy meeting requires both men's presence. "Sir," an aide suggests carefully, "perhaps we should meet with them separately." Eisenhower shakes his head firmly. "No, they're senior commanders. They need to act like professionals." "Sir, with respect, when has General Patton ever acted like a professional?" Eisenhower permits himself a brief smile. "Fair point, but we're doing this together. They'll behave." They do not behave. The meeting starts well. Updates on German positions, discussion of Soviet advances from the east, plans for crossing the Rhine, technical matters handled with professional efficiency. Then Montgomery unveils his proposal. He spreads maps across the conference table, his movements precise, his tone confident. "Gentlemen, I propose that 21st Army Group lead the main thrust into Germany. A single concentrated assault under unified command, my command, is the most efficient approach." Bradley shifts uncomfortably. This is Montgomery's recurring argument. Give him everything, let him run the entire operation, sideline the Americans. "Monty," Eisenhower begins diplomatically. "We've discussed this," Montgomery interrupts. "We've been advancing on a broad front for months. It's slow, it's wasteful, it dilutes our strength. A concentrated thrust under single command would end this war weeks earlier." "Single command meaning your command," Bradley points out, his voice flat. "Well, naturally," Montgomery responds without hesitation. "I have the experience, the strategic vision, and the proven track record. No offense to American commanders, but this requires a professional approach." The room temperature drops 10 degrees. Professional approach. Montgomery's coded phrase for Americans are amateurs. Patton, who's been sitting silently twirling a pencil, looks up. His expression shifts from boredom to something dangerous. Eisenhower sees it immediately. He knows that look. "George, don't." Too late. "Professional approach," Patton says quietly, his voice deceptively calm. "You mean like Market Garden?" Montgomery stiffens as if slapped. Market Garden was a calculated risk that, unfortunately, Market Garden was a carefully planned, meticulously prepared professional operation, Patton interrupts, his voice rising, that failed completely, cost thousands of lives, and achieved absolutely nothing. But sure, let's give you sole command of the final offensive. What could possibly go wrong? General Patton, Montgomery says coldly, perhaps you should focus on your own operations before criticizing others. I seem to recall you running out of fuel in September because you advanced recklessly. I ran out of fuel because you got all the supplies for your operation that failed, Patton's voice echoes off the walls. While I was at the German border, ready to win the war, you were planning elaborate operations that went nowhere. Gentlemen, Eisenhower attempts to intervene. Both generals ignore him. You call advancing 400 miles in a month reckless? Patton continues, standing now. What do you call advancing 50 miles in 3 months? Oh, wait. I know. Professional. Montgomery's face reddens. At least my operations are planned properly, not these cowboy charges across the countryside. My cowboy charges work. I took Bastogne in 48 hours while you were still planning your response. I crossed the Rhine before you even started your massive operation. I advance while you consolidate. You take unnecessary risks. I take calculated risks that produce results. Patton is fully shouting now. You take no risks and produce nothing except excuses. Enough! Eisenhower slams his hand on the table hard enough to make coffee cups jump. Both of you stand down. This is a strategy meeting, not a schoolyard argument. But Patton isn't finished. The words pour out of him like artillery fire, each sentence a detonation. You want to know the difference between us, Monty? I win wars. You plan them. I advance. You consolidate. I take risks. You make excuses. And you think your way is professional while my way is reckless. He leans across the table. His face inches from Montgomery's. Here's what's actually reckless. Giving you command of anything more important than a parade. The silence that follows is absolute. 30 officers sit frozen, barely breathing. British officers look horrified. American officers are desperately trying not to smile. Montgomery stands slowly, his face pale with fury. How dare you, he whispers. I dare, Patton says flatly. Because unlike you, I'm not afraid of telling the truth. You're a competent general who thinks he's a great one. You plan operations that take months and achieve what I achieve in days. And you have the audacity to suggest you should command the final offensive. He pauses, then delivers the killing blow. You couldn't command a bingo night. Montgomery walks out without a word, his staff following in stunned silence. The conference room remains frozen until the sound of British boots fades down the corridor. Eisenhower slowly turns to Patton. His expression moves through anger, disappointment, exhaustion, and fury before settling on something that might be resignation. George, my office, now. They walk in silence. Eisenhower closes the door. Then he explodes. What the hell was that? That, Patton says with infuriating calmness, was me stating facts Montgomery needed to hear. Facts? You called him incompetent to his face in front of 30 officers. He is incompetent, Patton replies. Or at best, mediocre, and everybody knows it. I'm just the only one willing to say it. You can't say it! Eisenhower's voice rises to a roar. George, we're allies with the British. We need their cooperation. And you just humiliated their senior field commander in front of witnesses. He humiliates himself every time he suggests taking command of American forces. Patton's voice remains level, which only infuriates Eisenhower more. Ike, he's been insulting American commanders for months. That press conference after the Bulge, he made it sound like we needed British forces to save us. That was insulting, but nobody called him on it. Because Montgomery's insults are subtle, Eisenhower shouts. Yours are like being hit with a brick. Good. Maybe he'll finally get the message. Eisenhower sits heavily in his chair, suddenly looking 10 years older. George, Do you understand what you've done? Montgomery is going to complain to Churchill. Churchill is going to complain to the president. I'm going to spend the next week doing diplomatic damage control. And why? Because you couldn't control your temper for one meeting. My temper was completely controlled, Patton says. I said exactly what I meant to say. That's worse, Eisenhower's voice cracks. If you'd lost your temper, I could explain it away as stress, as battlefield exhaustion. But you deliberately insulted a British field marshal. I deliberately told the truth to someone who needed to hear it. Eisenhower stares at him for a long moment. When he speaks again, his voice is dangerously quiet. George, give me one good reason why I shouldn't relieve you of command right now. Patton meets his gaze without flinching. Because you need me. Because Third Army advances faster than anyone else. Because I win battles nobody else can win. Because despite my terrible personality and complete inability to play politics, I'm the best combat commander you have. He pauses. And because Montgomery really is mediocre, and you know it. Eisenhower can't argue with that last point. Privately, he agrees with more of Patton's assessment than he'll ever admit publicly. Get out, he finally says. And George, if you ever do something like this again, I don't care how valuable you are. I'll send you home. Understood, Patton says. He salutes and leaves. After the door closes, Bedell Smith enters quietly. Sir, what are you going to do? Damage control, Eisenhower says tiredly. Call Churchill's office. Arrange a call. I need to explain this before Montgomery's complaint arrives. What will you tell Churchill? The truth, Eisenhower sighs. That Patton is brilliant, necessary, and completely impossible to control. And that I'm very sorry he insulted Montgomery, but also that some of what he said wasn't entirely wrong. Montgomery reaches Churchill within hours. His voice trembles with suppressed rage as he recounts Patton's insults. Prime Minister, I must protest in the strongest possible terms. General Patton has insulted me personally, insulted British forces generally, and questioned my competence in front of Allied staff officers. This is intolerable. What exactly did he say? Churchill asks, his tone carefully neutral. Montgomery lists the insults. The market garden comments, the professional approach mockery, the devastating parade remark. Churchill is quiet for a long moment. Bernard, what did you say that provoked this? I made a strategic proposal that Patton disagreed with. What did you say about American commanders? Churchill presses. Montgomery hesitates. I may have suggested that a professional approach was needed, by which you meant British command was superior to American command. I meant that unified command under an experienced commander. You, Churchill interrupts. You suggested that you should command all Allied forces. Yes, but... Bernard, Churchill sighs heavily. You've been making this argument for months. The Americans have rejected it repeatedly. Did you expect a different response? I expected professional courtesy, not personal attacks. You got the response you deserved, Churchill says bluntly. Bernard, I know you're a capable commander, but you have an unfortunate habit of suggesting that British commanders are superior to American ones. Eventually, someone was going to respond forcefully. I'm only surprised it took this long. So you're taking Patton's side? I'm taking reality's side, Churchill responds sharply. Bernard, the Americans provide most of the men, most of the equipment, and most of the supplies for this war. You cannot continue insulting them and expect no consequences. After ending the call with Montgomery, Churchill immediately phones Eisenhower. Ike, I understand there was an incident today. That's putting it mildly, Winston, I'm sorry. Patton was completely out of line. Was he? Churchill asks. Ike, between you and me, was anything Patton said actually untrue? Eisenhower is silent. That's what I thought, Churchill says. Ike, I'll smooth things over with Montgomery, but you need to understand something. He's been antagonizing American commanders for months. Eventually, someone was going to snap. Winston, I can't have my generals insulting Allied commanders. Then tell Montgomery to stop implying that British command is superior, Churchill says bluntly. This isn't one-sided, Ike. Patton was rude, but Montgomery was arrogant. They're both at fault. What do I do? Separate them, Churchill advises. Never put them in the same meeting again. Give them different objectives. Keep them far apart. Problem solved. That's not exactly Allied unity. Ike, Churchill's voice softens. Sometimes Allied unity means keeping difficult people on opposite sides of the battlefield. Use them both. Just don't mix them. 2 days later, Eisenhower summons Patton again. George, you're going to apologize to Montgomery. Absolutely not. It's not a request, it's an order. I won't apologize for telling the truth. You'll apologize for the way you told the truth, Eisenhower says firmly. You can believe Montgomery is mediocre. You can't call him incompetent to his face in front of Allied staff. They argue for an hour. Finally, Patton agrees to write a letter. Sort of. The letter reads, Field Marshal Montgomery, I regret that my comments during our recent strategy meeting may have been expressed too forcefully. In the heat of strategic discussion, I sometimes speak more bluntly than diplomatic protocol requires. I respect your service and your dedication to Allied victory. We may disagree on operational approaches, but we share the same ultimate goal. I look forward to continued cooperation as we complete the defeat of Germany. Respectfully, George S. Patton Eisenhower reads it and sighs deeply. This is the worst apology I've ever seen. It's the best you're getting, Patton says. I apologized for how I said it. I didn't apologize for what I said, because what I said was true. George, send the letter or don't, Patton interrupts. But I'm not writing another one. Eisenhower sends the letter. Montgomery's response arrives the next day, equally cold. General Patton, your letter is acknowledged. I accept that strategic discussions can become heated. I suggest that in future we communicate through General Eisenhower rather than directly. B.L. Montgomery. Translation, stay away from me. Well, Eisenhower tells Bradley, at least they're not shooting at each other. Give them time, Bradley replies. Eisenhower implements Churchill's advice with surgical precision. Separate Patton and Montgomery completely. New operational boundaries are drawn. 3rd Army advances through one sector of Germany. 21st Army Group advances through another. No shared objectives, no joint operations, no meetings. Congratulations, Eisenhower tells them both in separate briefings. You forced me to plan operations around your mutual hatred. I hope you're both happy. Patton. Extremely happy. Now I don't have to deal with Montgomery's condescension. Montgomery. Quite relieved. Now I won't be undermined by American recklessness. Eisenhower sighs heavily. Interestingly, the separation works. Without having to coordinate or compete directly, both armies advance faster. Patton races across southern Germany with his characteristic aggression. Montgomery advances through northern Germany with methodical efficiency. They work better apart than together, Bradley observes. Most incompatible people do, Eisenhower replies wearily. March 22nd and 23rd, 1945. Patton crosses the Rhine at Oppenheim. He does it quietly, with minimal preparation, achieving tactical surprise. He calls Eisenhower immediately. We're across the Rhine. March 24th, 1945. Montgomery crosses at Wesel with massive preparation, airborne drops, and enormous publicity. It's planned as the major Allied Rhine crossing, the operation that will be remembered by history. Patton deliberately calls Eisenhower again on March 24th. Just wanted you to know we crossed the Rhine before Montgomery's big show. Not that it's a competition. Oh, wait. Yes, it is. When Montgomery learns that Patton crossed first, he's livid. That cowboy couldn't wait one day. Actually, a British staff officer notes carefully, Patton crossed 2 days ago. He just didn't announce it until today. Montgomery's face darkens with realization. He planned this. He deliberately crossed before my operation just to upstage me. Churchill, when informed, laughs. Well, Bernard, you did say unified command was more efficient. Patton just demonstrated that his approach was faster. The rivalry continues, but now geography keeps them safely apart. The war in Europe ends. Victory celebrations are planned across the continent. Eisenhower faces a new nightmare. Patton and Montgomery will both be required to attend official ceremonies together. Sir, Bedell Smith suggests, we could have separate ceremonies for American and British forces. No, Eisenhower says firmly. We won this war together. We'll celebrate together, even if it kills me. April 30th. A planning meeting for VE Day ceremonies. Both generals are required to attend. The atmosphere could freeze mercury. Patton and Montgomery sit on opposite sides of the room. They don't speak. They don't make eye contact. When one speaks, the other examines the ceiling with great interest. Gentlemen, Eisenhower begins carefully, VE Day is approaching. We'll have official ceremonies in several locations. I need both of you present and professional. Of course, Montgomery says stiffly. Naturally, Patton says with equal stiffness. That means no insults, no subtle digs, no competition over who gets more recognition. Both men nod. I mean it, Eisenhower presses. The world will be watching. I need you both to act like Allied commanders who respect each other. I can act, Patton says. As can I, Montgomery agrees. Good, Eisenhower says, not believing either of them. May 8th, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. At a ceremony in Berlin, Patton and Montgomery stand side by side for photographs. Both smile for the cameras. Neither looks at the other. A reporter asks Montgomery, Field Marshal, what was it like working with General Patton? Montgomery's smile becomes fixed. Challenging but productive. The same question to Patton. Educational. I learned a lot about careful planning. The emphasis on careful is subtle but unmistakable. At dinner that evening, they're seated at opposite ends of a long table. Churchill proposes a toast. To Allied unity. To commanders who set aside personal differences for the greater good. Everyone raises their glasses. Patton and Montgomery toast in opposite directions. After dinner, Churchill pulls Eisenhower aside. Well, they didn't kill each other. I'd call that a success. That's the saddest definition of success I've ever heard, Eisenhower replies. After the war, historians and commanders assessed the Patton-Montgomery rivalry with the clarity that only distance provides. Churchill's memoirs. Patton and Montgomery were both brilliant commanders in different ways. Patton was fire and aggression. Montgomery was calculation and preparation. Neither could stand the other. Managing their rivalry was one of Eisenhower's most difficult challenges, but perhaps a necessary one, but competition between them drove both to greater achievements than either might have accomplished alone. Eisenhower's memoirs. The confrontation between Patton and Montgomery in January 1945 was the low point of Allied command relations. George's comments were inexcusable, but Bernard's provocations weren't innocent either. Both men were difficult, proud, and convinced of their own superiority. Keeping them working toward the same goal while preventing them from destroying each other required more diplomacy than any negotiation with enemy forces. Bradley's memoirs. George was right about Montgomery, but he was right in the worst possible way, loudly, publicly, and insultingly. Montgomery was mediocre compared to Patton, but you don't say that to an Allied field marshal's face in front of witnesses. George's greatest weakness was his inability to understand that being right isn't enough. You also have to be diplomatic. And George was never diplomatic. Modern military historians. The consensus has shifted toward Patton's view, albeit with more nuance than his blunt assessment allowed. Montgomery's post-El Alamein record was indeed mixed. Market Garden failed completely. Operations took longer and required more resources than Patton's advances. Meanwhile, Patton's relief of Bastogne, Rhine crossing, and advances across Europe were consistently faster and more efficient than predicted. History, it seems, has vindicated some of Patton's criticism, while simultaneously confirming that his method of delivering it nearly destroyed Allied unity at the moment when unity mattered most. January 15, 1945. Allied Strategy Meeting, Versailles, France. Tell me he didn't just say that. But Patton did say it. All of it. Every insulting, career-threatening, alliance-endangering word. He called Montgomery mediocre. He mocked Market Garden. He questioned competence. He delivered insults that should have ended his military career on the spot. And he got away with it. Why? Because Eisenhower needed him. Because Patton was too valuable to fire, too effective to sideline, too brilliant to punish. Because Third Army advanced faster than any other Allied force. Because when the impossible needed to be accomplished, Patton accomplished it. And because, privately, quietly, in moments he would never admit publicly, Eisenhower agreed with some of what Patton said. Montgomery was arrogant. His proposal to command all Allied forces was tone-deaf. His operations were slower than Patton's. Market Garden had failed catastrophically while consuming resources that might have ended the war months earlier. But you can't say that. Not in Allied command. Not when political considerations matter as much as military ones. Not when the fragile coalition between nations depends on maintaining face, preserving dignity, respecting protocol. Tell me he didn't just say that. The phrase captured Eisenhower's entire experience managing Patton. Every week brought some new outrage, some new insult requiring diplomatic cleanup. And every week, Eisenhower would whisper those same words. Tell me he didn't just say that. But Patton always did say it, because that's who he was. Brilliant, effective, necessary, impossible. The general who insulted a field marshal to his face and got away with it because even when Patton was wrong about how he said things, he was usually right about what he said. Three difficult men navigating impossible circumstances. Churchill, the politician fighting to maintain British influence in an increasingly American-dominated war. Eisenhower, the diplomat trying to manage personalities while winning battles, forced to keep his best commanders apart to prevent them from destroying Allied unity. Patton, the warrior who refused to play political games, even when his career depended on it, who believed that truth mattered more than diplomacy, and that winning mattered more than politeness. Montgomery never forgave him. Eisenhower never forgot it. Churchill found it darkly amusing. And history notes that Patton was crude. Montgomery was arrogant, and Eisenhower somehow kept them both fighting Germans instead of each other. Tell me he didn't just say that. He did. And it was spectacular and terrible. And somehow, against all odds, the alliance survived.